right, well, welcome. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Jackie Stavros, and I'm here with my colleagues and the founders of the Conversation Worth Having Institute. So thank you for taking time. For many of you, it's the end of the day to join, which is now our third Conversations Worth Having Learning Lab. The first one was on relationships. The second one was on polarized conversations. And if you go to our website at www.cwh.today, you can actually go back and watch those conversations. So what are we going to do this evening? Today, you will be learning that if you're not in a senior leadership position, you can still have significant influence using the two Conversations Worth Having practices to lead up. Today, we're going to offer a short presentation, some tips, stories about leading up, and an opportunity to actually practice generative questions and positive framing to lead from the bottom, if that's where you are in an organization or community. Let me tell you briefly, before jumping into the topic, about each of our members here today, which is Cheri, Kelly, and Melissa. So Cheri Torres is from Asheville, North Carolina. She's the co-author of Conversations Worth Having. She's the founder and CEO of Collaborative by Design and a very special conscious leadership project called the SAMI Project. Cheri's role is a catalyst for positive change, encouraging people to recognize their leadership potential as an integral part of natural systems. Quite a bit of leadership experience there. And then we have Kelly Stewart from Middletown, Delaware. Kelly, you've had a lot of leadership experience in a lot of organizations, and Kelly's personality and leadership style naturally just brings out the best in others, as I have witnessed. Kelly believes that leaders do well by doing good and serving their employees and customers. And she's also the founder of the Positive Business and Director of Community Engagement for the Center for Appreciative Inquiry. Thanks for being here, Kelly. And then we have Melissa Robaina is from Las Vegas, Nevada. So Melissa, as a COO for the Center for Appreciative Inquiry and company experts, Melissa, you've had experience both leading up and across these centers in your roles. And we witnessed Melissa blends operational excellence and creative mindset, and it connects and uplifts people in how she leads from just about anywhere in her life. So as we jump into our topic today, which is leading up, I'm just going to offer a perspective and hand it over to the three of you. So I thought about leading up and what does that mean? And leadership is not for just those at the top. And a lot of people think leadership is about a position. You've even heard leadership titles, but leadership is really not about a position. And you'll learn today that leadership can be exercised from anywhere, anytime in an organization. So I would just like to say, don't wait for a title to lead up. So I want to turn it over to you ladies.
Thank you, Jackie. We're just going to start with a real quick presentation, just in case any of you are not familiar with or have forgotten what the practices are and how you might use them. So quickly, what percentage of your waking hours are spent in conversation? Type into chat really quickly, including conversations with yourself. I'm seeing 90%, 90, 98, 99.999. Yes. So conversations are like the water in which fish swim. It's omnipresent. We often don't pay much attention to it. We just talk. We react, we respond. And like the water, if it's toxic, fish can't thrive. If our conversations are toxic, we can't thrive. So the idea is to make sure that we have conversations that are worth having so we can thrive. And the thing to point out is because they're omnipresent, you cannot not lead with your words. They are always influencing your own thoughts, your own feelings, as well as everybody that's around you. Goes up, down, sideways, internally to you and externally with everyone. The real question is, how do I be conscious and intentional so I can create conversations that help all of us thrive? And the idea is to use two steps. One is to tune in. So instead of reacting, you want to pause, take a deep breath, and then get curious, which shifts you out of a place of being triggered or reactive. Often if we're on not in a leadership role, or we are in a leadership role, but we're now on the bottom rung of leadership, and there are managers or senior leaders above us, we can get triggered and frustrated by their behavior, and it stops us from leading up. And so the first thing to do would be to pause, breathe, and get curious. And we'll talk more about that. And then the next is to use two simple practices: ask generative questions and use a positive frame. Generative questions are designed to widen the screen. Very often, as we're talking, the screen that we're looking through, our perceptions can get narrower and narrower as we're focusing in on something. And the idea with a generative question is to widen the screen intentionally before we start to narrow down into either solutions or planning. And these generative questions shift the way we think and the way we see the nature of a situation. And they do that typically by making the invisible visible, like assumptions. And for example, you might ask a question like, what does excellence look like for you here? And that would invite somebody to make what they're thinking excellence is visible to everyone. Or what purpose will this serve? Are there any specific outcomes you're looking for? Then there are generative questions that invite shared understanding. Here's my plan. What resonates for you? What suggestions do you have? Or can we check to make sure we both have a shared understanding around this? What are you understanding? Generative questions also generate new knowledge. For example, what benchmarks might we use? Benchmarks from another industry or from an outside organization in the same industry. Generating new knowledge. Can I share the way we did this at my previous organization? Brings in knowledge from another business into your process. And then generating possibilities or inspiring them. What if my team first tried coming up with an innovative way to do this that saved us money? Or have you considered? And then positive framing is, as you're leading up, focus on what you want and not on what you don't want. So flipping is a tool to help you create a positive frame. First, name the problem or the complaint. It's often helpful to hang out there for a while to make sure you've actually got the problem. For example, let's say the problem or the issue is my boss isn't clear, and then he criticizes us when we do it wrong. And we're pretty sure that that's the thing that's the problem, that he's not clear when he gives us instructions and then we get criticized. The flip is to write down the positive opposite or name the positive opposite. So the positive opposite would simply be, my boss is clear and we don't get criticized. And then create a frame, and the frame is the positive impact of the flip. What's the desired result? If the positive opposite is true, what's the result we're getting? And what is it that we want to talk about in order to create some shared desired outcome? So for example, I might want to figure out, how can I help my boss learn how to lead me by creating shared expectations so I can do quality work efficiently? And so that would be the frame that I would bring to that conversation with my boss. Do you want to talk just briefly about this, Kelly?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And in full disclosure, you didn't hear it in Jackie's bio because it's true. I'm not a psychologist, but I know that this is something that psychologists use. It's called the wheel of emotions. And when I first learned about it, one of the things that struck me was that the majority of the wheel can be really a lot of fear-based emotions that we see kind of manifested in different ways. And I think part of this creating shared understanding in the generative questions and the whole process of conversations worth having is to help people move into the good feeling emotions, because I've boiled it down to when we feel better, we think better. And so when we see these words that are used that are very specific, like apathetic, or someone might be feeling isolated at work, and then we can have a little bit more empathy for them. So that kind of drives some of my thinking when I use this in conjunction with conversations worth having.
Yeah, this could be very helpful as you tune in and get curious about where am I and where's the other person.
Exactly.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, so that's an overview. And we thought we would just start off by having a bit of a conversation around what does leading up mean to us, and how has that concept played a role in our lives, and especially around how to use conversations worth having, the tuning in or positive framing and generative questions to support that. So Kelly, you want to kick off?
Sure. Thank you again, Cheri. When we first started talking about this, leading up, we were talking about power dynamics and how sometimes people can feel probably at any stage in their career, but especially as an emerging leader, that they're not enough in some way, and that maybe their work isn't good enough, or there's a fear of rejection. And I shared with our group here that for me, then leading up very quickly became this idea of leading yourself first. And locating yourself and on that wheel or wherever you might be, to say, what's kind of going on with me right now, and how might I just lead myself to gain that confidence, right? To gain that sense that I do have a place at the table. I'm already flipping, right? And so for me, that always boils down to other questions that I've used. And I have a couple of stories to share that I said they're from the Kelly Stewart Career Vault from a while back. And I invite any of you who, if you've got similar type stories or something, a situation that you'd like to share, please feel free to be thinking about that too, as I talk about some of the things that I've done before I had a language for conversations worth having. But it's definitely true now, is this idea of what if I could do this, and what would it look like? And that was an entree for me. And I think when we talk about leading up and leading ourselves, it's always about the natural next step for me. How can I do something that feels good and is moving me forward also? And one of the situations that came to my mind was early on in my career. I worked for a smaller company. We had very large clients. So I was leading up through the client is the way this went down. Our president needed to be out on a medical leave for an extended period of time. And I knew I had to go and report to our major client on our progress. And I knew that other agencies they worked with were also going to be at that table. And so, of course, I had over-prepared, because I think I was looking back feeling like I wasn't enough, and did I have it all right? So I had like a binder of paperwork and reports, and I had memorized those numbers so that I could answer them. And when we got there, I was the only representative from my company. Every other agency that was there had at least 2 people, and they had nothing at the table with them. They were just sitting there kind of relaxed. And I was, sitting upright. And I sat to the right of the client. And fortunately for me, he started with the left. And I really watched him bully, I guess, for lack of a better term. Again, I didn't really have an awareness of it at this time. This was all pre-internet, right? But I just thought, oh, wow, he was grilling them. And they really didn't have definitive answers. And I thought to myself, okay, you're prepared, right? I had to lead in. So what might happen if he realizes that I've got answers for him, because that's what he was really looking for. He was just getting more frustrated every time he talked to someone. So when he turned to me, he said, "And what about you?" I said, "What would you like to know? I've prepared a few things here, but it may not be the thing you're most interested in now." That just shifted the whole dynamics. So I was able in that time to gain my own confidence because I had done the prep work. But I think in reaching out to him and understanding there was a symptom of bullying people, but realizing that, oh, I think he's looking for something he's not getting. And it shifted the dynamic between us almost immediately. It also shifted the dynamic with everyone else. They were not happy with me. And I had to just kind of stand in that for a little bit and be like, well, I'm doing what I was sent to do. This is what the president of our company wants us to do. And I'm delivering this information. We've always prided ourselves on being partners with our clients and being collaborative. And so I had that information for him. And, again, this is coming from the vault. So I didn't necessarily have the practices or the vocabulary, but I realized I was starting to use those things back then. And I think that it started with, what do I want to see? If I was reporting to myself, right? So that's how I ended up creating a binder of reports and really over preparing for things. But it was just one example where I feel I was able to lead myself and gain that confidence in moving forward.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of the tips for leading up is to spend some time thinking about, if you have the opportunity, what will you say? What will you contribute?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What might I want to see, and how might I want to project myself? Because I knew in that moment, watching him go around the table, I thought, showing fear is not my friend here. He's not going to feel bad for me if I'm like, So, I just kind of had to lean into it. And I think that was very helpful. And there are, that's one of those situations where, wow, I would love to be able to turn back the hands of time, come from today with all that I have now through conversations worth having. And I think I would have felt more confident going right into it right out of the gate. So,
yeah, that's interesting. Melissa, you mentioned imposter syndrome in the chat, I noticed. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I have been with the Center for Appreciative Inquiry for 15 years. And when I first started, I was in a room full of people with doctorates and years of experience in the field of appreciative inquiry. And here I was, a little baby facilitator, and I felt as if I almost didn't deserve to be there or didn't have the skills needed. And over the years, I've gained more experience, but I could not shake that imposter syndrome. And I realized through conversation that it was really the narrative I was telling myself. And so I feel one of the biggest lessons that I've taken in terms of leading up is really just, again, it probably is tuning in and thinking to myself, how am I showing up in this moment? How am I showing up for this meeting? What narrative am I telling myself and convincing myself of? And what might I do to start to challenge or question these biases, assumptions, and stories that I'm holding of myself? And so I found that by doing that before any sort of engagement, whether it's a consulting, facilitation, training, what have you, that just asking myself these questions, because I am fully capable. I know that. I know that. But sometimes it's just, I fight with myself because, I'm my own biggest critic. So I think just tuning in, really having a hard conversation with myself as to what am I convincing myself of and what other narratives are possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think imposter syndrome is a really, I don't know whether we'd call it an issue or not, but it's big for more women than it is for more men. I'm not quite sure why, other than it's just part of our culture. I also recently read something that women are more apt to question themselves and stay humble instead of making assumptions they have the answers, and that may play into it in ways. And that also might be a clue in terms of leading up, is to make sure you don't overcompensate by coming in, with "I have the answer," as opposed to coming in with more of a generative "what if," or "here are some ideas." I think for me, one of a key factor for leading up is remembering that it's not about me and it's not about the other person. It's what we're trying to do together. It's the purpose we're trying to serve. And if I can use that frame, even for bringing an issue forward, and I go in with the assumption that whoever the people are on up top, that they, at some level, they share that same commitment and purpose to our organizational purpose and our strategic plan. So if I can link what I'm wanting to say or suggest to that higher purpose, and I don't make it about them, and I don't make it about me, then I'm just simply being of value to the organization. But I also think that to do that, going back to what you were talking about, Kelly, checking into where am I? If I try to do that, but inside I'm still feeling it's all about me. I'm afraid, or I'm not enough, or I feel like an imposter. That's going to come through in my voice. Yeah. So.
Great.
So we have a question by Susan. Susan, do you want to unmute yourself and kind of give us a little context to your question in the chat?
Well, I'm sorry, this is like taking us offline, but at the beginning you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, that you could view the other options that were available, different conversations, and I didn't understand where you'd find that.
If you go to conversationsworthhaving.today, which I've just typed in,
Okay.
and then go to the tab for Learn, and then click on videos. So I would like to share quickly a story that a client recently told me, that where they've been using conversations worth having. And one of their complaints was that they're in a very bureaucratic organization. It's a hospital, and they are one department in that hospital. And their complaint was that bureaucracy really did not, the upper level bureaucracy didn't listen to them, treated them like second-class citizens. They wouldn't listen to their suggestions. They would say yes to something, and then they would roll over it and do something differently. And then after the Conversations Worth Having training, one of the teams said they did a flip on everybody in the upper echelon is against us, to some of the people in the upper echelon are with us. And then the frame was, who are those people that are our allies that we can begin to talk to? And that opened up a door for them to go find the leaders in the bureaucracy that were really allies and on their side. And so it shifted a lot for them just doing that. So that's shifting their own mindset frame.
That's a great story, because I was thinking along the same lines, like, how might we use Conversations Worth Having? Sometimes it's not always the case that people are connected to that plan. and you can end up working with some people who I would say are a little bit more disingenuous, or unclear about what their intentions are, or they've got a variety of intentions. And, how might you use these practices to really understand what they might be thinking? And I think, Cheri, you started to touch on that with this example, right? If we can flip it and say, where's our ally? Maybe we could flip it to say, where are we connected? If they're not completely bought in on the plan, but they're sitting at the conference room table going, oh yeah, no, that's fine, that's great, but they have no intention of collaborating with you. What might you collaborate on, or what else might be happening? And I think that could be an opportunity to flip it, frame it, and use some of these generative questions to help uncover, again, that place where you can take your natural next step and possibly work together.
Yeah. So that makes me think about the question, what gets in the way of people leading up? And we have imposter syndrome, and we have the I'm not enough, or your internal fears. What else gets in our way of leading up, or what we think is in our way?
I think maybe fear of repercussions. If there are power dynamics at play, maybe voicing something might get you in trouble at work.
So that makes me think that how we lead up makes all the difference when there are power dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might be a place where the focusing on the purpose or the goal or the strategic point, or making the person in power look good. I want you to succeed. Here's an idea.
And asking, what might be the best way for me to share feedback? When has there been a time when someone has shared feedback with you, or feed forward, because they might not be familiar with that term, but what is the best way to do this? When have you seen it work really well? Tell me about a time then when someone brought up a new idea that maybe hadn't been presented before that actually was implemented. Can you tell me more about how did that happen?
Yes. Yeah, there are a couple of things in the chat with Susan says fear of looking stupid. Wendy says the chain of command can be pretty rigid in some places. You can only report to the person right above you. Or when a system is in transition or confined by red tape. So I'm wondering what, we can probably always find a reason that we can't lead up. How do what are some ways that when it looks like we can't lead up, we can anyway?
I was thinking when I think of leading up, I think of our bosses or our supervisors or senior leadership that above. And I always think is trying to understand your bosses or your supervisors' broader goals and objectives, and asking them that, and then asking yourself, what are yours, and looking for alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, I like that.
Mm-hmm. And Amber, I'm looking at yours when a system is in transition. And can you tell me a little bit more about that? Did we just lose her? Oh no, she had to go. I forgot. I'm wondering, now it makes my question all the more relevant. I was wondering about ambiguity and not knowing what somebody really means by that. But I'm thinking that could be happening in transition, where you might not know who to report to, or what processes and practices are going to be carried over during this transition, what new ones are coming along. And again, that made me think about, questions that might help us uncover or discover get some clarity, gain new knowledge. And I'll stop there because Amber had to leave.
Right. And it could also be being unsure of whether what I might suggest will fit into whatever the new, which makes
The
me
new
think
landscape.
asking questions like, how can I be of the greatest value during this transition time? Could be a
Exactly.
leading up question, even though it looks like a following question. It's a collaborative leadership question. And which also makes me think, I wonder whether shifting our mindset leading up implies hierarchy. And yes, we still have hierarchy in all of our organizations, but I wonder if we adopt the mindset of whole system, that it takes the leading up out, and instead it's the sharing leadership at all levels, that kind of collaborative piece of the mindset we bring to it.
Well, I think too, and I've run into this problem even with the center, which is when we think of whole systems, I think sometimes that can be misleading. It can feel like it's me against the entire organization. And I just think that can be very overwhelming and paralyzing for some. And so maybe just looking at what is my sphere of influence and what can I reasonably accomplish within my organization, within my team, within my department. And maybe it's just focusing on our individual actions and really looking at the questions we ask one another. Because I think if we think of whole systems, at least speaking on my experience, it can seem very overwhelming.
I think very true. And Rosalind, you mentioned in the chat lack of support from peers, right? So there's a stakeholder group. And is there some other details you could share with us, or a context or a scenario that we might be able to talk about?
I was thinking about a time when you've got people who agree with what you say, but when we get to a meeting, they actually then don't support you.
Yes.
Or prior to that, they have said, yeah, what a really good idea, and we're all for it.
I've been there too, Rosalind. Thank you for sharing that. And again, Cheri's example with her client of trying to find maybe who the ally is, and thinking that some people do, and maybe finding out, is there someone who would support you in going in this together instead of maybe going it alone? Or Melissa, maybe the sphere of influence, you see that at play here?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Melissa. Do you see the sphere of influence at play in this scenario? Hi, Amber.
Welcome back. I think also you might, as you're talking with your peers before you go into that meeting, to ask, is there anything that will get in your way of being able to support me during the meeting in this process? And they might be very open to say, oh, I support your idea, but I'm not going to do that in the meeting, because if the boss doesn't like it, I don't want to be aligned. And so knowing that ahead of time, then you don't get caught off guard when you get into the meeting.
Very true. Very true. Amber, thank you so much. I see you're having some internet. I am as well. But as you had to hop off before, I was asking you if you could tell us a little bit more about this system being in transition, but because I was thinking that it might have to do with ambiguity, and then you were gone. I was like, oh, well, yes, it's ambiguous right now.
Well, the system I'm in, we've had a leadership change, and it's the Diocese of Connecticut for the Episcopal Church. So we have a new bishop who, is a priest, is elected bishop. So he's new to being a bishop. And the way our structure is, our previous bishop really liked direct contact. So even though you might have had a supervisor who would be the one to sign off on your vacation, there was direct access. If he had a question about an interaction you might have had, it would be direct to you. It was great.
Right.
New one is not only adverse to like having those conversations, like literally we'll go to your supervisor and then all of a sudden we're having like after 7.5 years of the organization, I'm having like supervisor meetings.
Right.
And not just me, everybody, but
Mhm.
they're hiring a chief of staff. So they're now going to add another layer in.
Oh,
And I
Mhm.
was like, oh, okay. And I mean, I am a one person department of a huge part of what we do. So I've always had the direct access. I've been used to the direct access. I've been used to being a leader in the organization, which is our organization's not known for moving people up, and they didn't want me to leave. So they created a position. So I won it. So like, and all of a sudden I'm now in a place where ambiguity. Yes. And, it's tough. It's tough having been a leader in a position like for very long and now feeling like even if I have an idea, they now have to go through so many channels, like
Mhm.
and red tape that's never existed. So it's almost being like being very familiar, but in a very new place.
Right.
And so I'm trying to figure out how to reestablish that like leadership, but with entirely different personalities and a different system, like a different.
Mhm.
So yeah, good times.
Thank you for sharing. So how might you flip that, frame it? I know you've been on Monday Kickstarters with us, right? What would be that positive opposite for you today, right? Maybe not, maybe there's a different kind of a vision for a year or two from now, but during this transition, what would the flip be for you? And I invite others to share too.
I would say just that I am a leader full of great ideas and I'm really good at my job.
Right. Right. Perfect.
Mhm.
So we have that as a frame.
Mm-hmm.
How might we work towards that? And I guess it kind of feels like now we're going into Monday Kickstarters
yes,
territory.
it does.
But what generative questions then might we ask, or what would be happening if that frame, oh, thank you, Cheri. If that frame is achieved, what would be different? What would you be seeing? What would you be hearing if that flip was happening? I'm sorry, I have all of my words confused today. Ignore the face here.
Um, hmm. Try to get the sand out of my brain.
How might others be treating you if that flip was happening? And I just, you're a leader, right? Okay, so that's the name it. But in that flip where you have that feeling, right? You're like, I'm experienced, I'm here. I'm sorry, I don't remember everything that you just said, but that flip is there. So what's happening? What's different that really makes you understand, like, okay, this is happening for me. It's that vivid picture.
Ideally, the new bishop will listen to me.
Right. Right.
Um,
And so then what questions, I mean, this is leading up, right? Leading yourself first. And what questions, I open that up to everyone who's familiar with conversations worth having. What types of generative questions could we be asking to help Amber with this? And I apologize, Cheri and Jackie, if I've taken this
No, this is
in another direction.
So would you like us to type in some generative questions for Amber to ask her new boss?
That would be great. Yeah. You can put them in chat and we could get them up on the whiteboard, or if you are familiar going to view options up at the top of your screen, you can click on annotate and then text, and you'll have a little text box that you can type your questions in.
Is it too defensive to be like, what do you need to see to have faith in me?
Well, look at the question I just typed. It was close to what you said, Amber. What do you expect from me so I can contribute?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. How do I need to initiate this conversation?
That's a great one because we never even, I mean, we've only had like literally since October 3 one-on-ones and all that I've initiated.
Right. Okay.
And very specific things, like responses to very specific things.
And I might have read that question wrong. I'm reading again. How do I need to be to initiate this conversation? I think that's a tuning in question, which is also awesome. What new specific outcomes do you expect from me in the short and long term so I can contribute most effectively?
How many people are total are in this organization?
In our office, about 30.
Okay.
So
And
is
I'm senior, but I'm like second tier senior. And
Okay.
but it's just until this new, that never really seemed to matter. And now it's very defined. I don't like it.
Well, that's a good thing to understand also. And maybe one of my questions for you would be, what might you be able to do for yourself, right? To find some comfort in this ambiguity. It may be just it's a short-term question.
Oh yeah, I found a great therapist.
Have you been in other situations that are like this? When have those things been successful? I was thinking, I believe Wendy put in the chat that, chain of command can be very rigid. You might want to speak with Wendy and just see, what is her experience and how has she navigated through some things if that's been her direct experience.
Margie asked a really great question. Do you think he feels threatened by you?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good thing to ask because I mean, I honestly have now put it to where I feel like he just doesn't like me personally, which is a weird thing. And I know not everybody likes everybody, even though I'm used to being liked. But his executive assistant is like my work bestie. And she jokes that we share a brain. And when I'm like, he doesn't like me, and she can't even deny that anymore because of like things that have happened in meetings, but she'll be like, but I don't understand like how we work together. And I was like, maybe he only has room for one outspoken female. But I don't know. But I do like the idea of like, not that I'll know, because I don't think I can even talk to him about like why he's uncomfortable with the direct contact. It's so weird.
Wendy also just replied, and I want to thank her for that in the chat. I know I just kind of went right to you, Wendy. So thank you for playing along here with us.
And she says, I ignored the hierarchy and spent all my time with the chimpanzees.
And too, right? What if you continued on doing your work and delivering the results that you do? I'm not sure what all of your responsibilities are, but just kept your focus there. And how might that change the dynamic if you, I don't know, I don't know what that is, but if you were to focus on that, might that at least make you feel better?
That's my plan. Coming back from, I have several weeks off. He has several weeks off starting in the fall. That's kind of my plan, where I've always been a resource for like other people and stuff too, but I'm just going to kind of head down, do my thing for a while. Just also because they're going to be bringing in the new chief of staff next month and like watching what's going to happen.
Understood. We've got some great questions on this whiteboard.
I know.
So
Thank you guys so much.
We'll be able to save this.
Yes. And it also occurs to me that, if you're not worried about taking the credit for it, if you can find who does he listen to and go have your conversations with that person who can then share the ideas. Margie, do you want to unmute and just share what you typed?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking if you're talking with somebody who's and fear, I think is so it's so prevalent in with many people, and so I don't know. I guess I was just thinking if this man is afraid of me, you know, what what how might I approach how might I approach him so that I can kind of, and you're absolutely in the leader's seat right now. If I'm imagining you doing this, how could I approach him so that he feels more comfortable with me and maybe we can talk,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Amber, it reminds me of something, Richard Boyatzis. I had an email exchange with him a couple weeks ago, and there's 40 different leadership styles out there. And I asked him the question, what's the most effective style, or which style resonates with you? And his answer was, he didn't answer my question directly. He said, leading and leadership is all about relationships. It's very relational. So that he says you're pivoting and adapting styles because of the this relationship you have with the senior leader. And so what I've heard is, when each of you shared an example, it's not about having the answers to the person that is above you. It's about asking questions that connect you and frame issues, because you want to generate a more collaborative relationship, trust with this new leader. And maybe he does like you, he just doesn't know how to work with you. We don't know that yet. So you're going to have a conversation with this person.
Yeah. And it may be that he would prefer to receive information from you by email. Maybe he doesn't think quickly on his feet, and you think very fast, and the organization, and you've been leading, and he's like, I don't know what to do with her. And I don't know, have you shared with him what the old leadership, does he know what the old leadership style was versus his own?
Yeah, he was there for almost 3 months with our previous bishop, kind of like
Okay.
getting integrated and seeing how things were. So also seeing the level of trust that I had always had and the access I had, and
Yeah. That makes me, even saying that makes me think a question might be, how can we develop, I really had this high level of trust and vice versa. And how can you and I develop that level of trust? What do you need from me that will help you trust my leadership?
Mhm. Yep, the T word.
Yeah.
Especially in creating connection and relationship, as Jackie was saying, so I kind of clued in on that one too. Might explore what it means for him.
Yeah.
What it means to you.
Yeah, it's probably that underscore also in the underlying the ability to lead up is trusting yourself, trusting the person you're engaging with. Yeah.
Mhm.
Is there another scenario or question that people have that we might play with together?
This might be a little off topic, but in listening to this situation with the new bishop, I'm just coming back to leading up starts with us, and individuals like this, I think, feed some of that imposter syndrome that we feel. So what questions might we ask ourselves to kind of help recenter and reclaim our ability to lead?
that's awesome.
Great. All right, let's brainstorm generative questions.
Hmm. I'm going to borrow from Eleanor Roosevelt on this one.
He's a good person to borrow from.
Sorry, it just took me forever to type it. But what's the one thing you do is the quote, if you knew you wouldn't fail. But I'm thinking, or in this case, if you knew it would foster success. And sometimes for me, that helps because of all of, I have to kind of narrow in on something. And some asking myself just one thing often then, oh, okay, well, I've got that thing that's down on paper, right? I see where I'm going with that. Then I can start to think about other ideas also. Sometimes it's just hard for me to get started.
Yeah.
Mm. Uh-oh.
Oh, what about my work brings me joy? That's beautiful.
There it goes.
Yep.
Now I got it to work on the whiteboard. Couldn't before.
Okay, I put it in there too.
I like your question. About my work brings me joy?
Mhm.
That's what keeps me going back every day.
Wonderful.
I'm gonna stamp that one. What about my work brings me joy?
I love that one too.
Yep, that's a really good question.
Gonna be just like Jackie.
Oh, how motivated am I? Nice.
That's a wonderful question.
Hmm.
Hmm. I'm so grateful to be with such a wonderful group of people today doing this. I'm looking at now another whiteboard full of questions and
These are all
amazing.
great questions.
Mhm. Hmm.
Hmm. Boy, these questions you could like leave a space to fill in the blank on. These are wonderful questions.
It's great that we're ending on this because we said at the beginning, if you can effectively lead yourself, then you can lead up, down, sideways, anywhere in an organization to impact people.
Yeah. Yeah, these are great journal questions.
Mhm.
Just about anybody to.
Mhm.
I love these. So we will save them and send them out to people along with the link.
Oh, it's a good one. Just grab that
Rosalind, before we end up, is your question, what could I say to a colleague who was feeling like this? Is that something you'd like to ask somebody, or is that the context of what you just typed in the chat?
Ask yourself, right? Mhm.
Right.
Sometimes that brings some objectivity, some new insight to think about what would I say to someone else. I love
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
I also love how will reclaiming my ability to lead make a difference in others' lives. Wow. Amazing.
These are wonderful.
Who can help me? These are great.
Any more before I save it and stop share?
No, don't do that. I want to keep doing this all afternoon.
Oh. All right. So why don't we come back to the whole group of us. Any insights or thoughts that anybody else would like to share about leading up that we haven't talked about? Or that hasn't been put onto chat? So I'm going to summarize the notes that I was taking around tips for us. Be prepared to be able to share and show your leadership at meetings or when your boss or someone calls you in. Check in with the narrative that you're running in your head. What are you telling yourself? How are you showing up? How are you challenging any negative assumptions you're making about yourself, like imposter syndrome? Shift the focus off of me or the other and shift it onto what are we trying to do together? What's the outcome we're going for? Let's see. Understand the leaders that are above you, understand their broader goals, recognize power dynamics, and engage in ways that don't challenge the power and instead they augment the outcomes people are going after. What am I missing?
That's a really good list. You're gonna have to type that one up, Cheri.
Yeah, it'll go along with the others.
Maybe we can take a final question that's been going on in the chat if you're done listing tips.
Yes.
Rosalind, you said, has anyone heard of a program called Faking It? Can you tell us more what that program is or what made that question come?
It was a program where, say, you wanted to be, I don't know, a hairdresser or whatever, and then you'd go for the interview, but it'd spend a few sessions getting you ready for it, and you'd go up against other people who were actually qualified hairdressers, and it was amazing how the people who weren't qualified, but they were given quite a boost and told what to do, they could fake it, and actually then they'd go up against everyone else, and that's a bit like our roles. Like if you believe that you can do it and you get the right tips and advice, then you can get in there, and actually people sometimes believe you're better than you think you are.
I love that.
I love it too.
Yeah, another tip, believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Fake it till you make it.
So was it a series or a movie or just a documentary on faking?
It was a series. It was shown in England. I should probably Google it, but it was really good.
Okay.
Delightful. Well, we are at,
That's a great way to end.
yes.
It looks like fun.
Oh, so thank you to Kelly and Melissa and Jackie and everybody who showed up and contributed